Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I talk with Sebastian Kernbach, professor in the School of Management at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. He's the founder of the Next Midlife Transition program at the university, the first of its kind in continental Europe, and now on its fourth cohort. He's also visiting faculty at Stanford's DCI program and a leading voice in life design and transitions. He brings a fascinating blend of creativity, design thinking, and behavioral science to the challenges of midlife reinvention. In our conversation, we explore the landscape of midlife programs worldwide, how they differ, where they succeed, and what's missing. Sebastian shares insights on the science of action, overcoming infinite procrastination, and why small experiments, navigating what he calls magic circles and stairways to heaven, are the key to navigating career and life transitions. We also discuss the role of universities, businesses, and policymakers in shaping a world where longer lives mean longer, more fulfilling careers. And we consider whether Europe, with its deep cultural diversity and more holistic approach to aging, might offer a fresh perspective on midlife education. So if you're thinking about your own what's next, or want to understand how organizations and institutions can better support longer, more dynamic careers, listen up. So today I welcome Sebastian Kernbach to Four Quarter Lives. Sebastian, welcome.
Thanks, Avivah. Good to have you.
Delighted to have you. So you have founded the Midlife program at the University of St. Gallen, and I'm interviewing the heads of all the kind of different programs around the world. So in Switzerland, what was the driving force behind its creation at St. Gallen, and how has it evolved through, I think, now 3 cohorts? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We just had 3 cohorts, each about 25 to 30 people.
Yep.
So we are a community of around 75 people and welcoming the 4th cohort in May this year. And by the way, whoever wants to join us, even if you're not from Switzerland, feel free to come. 26th to 28th of May. Yeah, it was quite an interesting
We'll put the link in the show notes.
Of course. I'm going to share it with you and then you can share it to everyone. It was a quite interesting starting point because I was working already with the World Demographic Forum that is also based in Switzerland. They were interested in what is also the core of what you are doing in the terms of moving from the 3-stage life to the multi-stage life, the 100-year life is here and so on. So that was one thing. Then we had somebody at the executive school who was like eager to start new programs. And then we had actually an alumni from the DCI Stanford program, Herb Reband, who had his wildcard idea that he wanted to find a university or business school in Europe to do the first one in Europe in that sense. And for me, it was very interesting to meet him because we clicked immediately. There was a good energy. But for me, it was also a continuation of something that I had started already because with the World Demographic Forum, we basically said, yes, there are more transitions now because of the multi-stage life, but there's a lack of institutionalized support. It's left to the individual, and maybe you have a coach, you can afford a coach, maybe you have connections, but you are on your own in that sense. And we have started to identify certain groups, and we said, okay, so the young ones, maybe 16, 18 to 25, 30, they usually suffer from too many options to choose from, constant distraction, constant comparison with TikTok, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So I started to work with a German startup about a new type of gap year. So to help people even before they study to better know who they are and making better decisions. So that was already going on. And I used an approach we developed, life design or design your future, in order to do this. The second cohort we had was the people, around 30 to 40, 45, classical MBA students, I would say, where you have the interesting thing of they really know what they don't want anymore.
Yeah.
After having had their one.
After having done it for 10 years. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes have a hard time to articulate what they want instead.
Yeah.
And oftentimes being caught up in either or thinking like, shall I stay or shall I go? Shall I do big corporate or my own thing finally, right? And so we integrated also the approach in MBA programs in St. Gallen, also at Stellenbosch Business School in South Africa, where it became one of the most popular courses because people said they have a hard time in the transitioning after the MBA. And then there was the topic of the 50 plus year old or best ages in a way. And it was quite interesting for me because I looked into different studies. There was a very nice MIT study, for example, showing that from a developmental psychology perspective, we know a lot about childhood, adolescence, but we have not so much of an idea of life after 50 or especially after 60, and especially life where we are still healthy and in charge, right?
Well, because it's kind of new, right? What I call this new Q3 or third quarter is relatively unknown. We haven't seen it until this generation really massively going through it now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also why I tell everybody in the next program in St. Gallen that they are pioneers because they are the first who have another 20, 30 years. And it's not so well researched. And that MIT study asked people how they would envision their retirement. And there was two interesting findings. One was they used 50 words or less, which means they didn't really know what to say. And the other one is they used things like, I want to travel the world, I want to open a restaurant or a bar. And they basically cliches to some degree. And they said it was because they were inspired by celebrities doing that. So they wanted to do it themselves as well, even though they were in a different position. And what's interesting with the World Demographic Forum, we basically said, well, we have to create new types of stories or examples of how a life can look like beyond celebrities in a way, right?
Yeah, new role models for a new age,
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes maybe the big things like bed and breakfast in the south of Italy or Portugal, but also oftentimes very small things, like portraying a person that I had recently who said, once I started to do 10,000 steps in the morning with my neighbor, I completely changed my retirement because it gave me structure, something to do, social connection. And now they built their own senior academy from it. So I think we also need to portray those smaller things that are even more effectful because the bigger things might happen as well, but the smaller are more likely.
And 10,000 steps probably gives you a lot of energy and health that you didn't have before, which kind of drives all the rest, right? So, Sebastian, tell me, we're comparing a little bit all these different midlife programs. A lot of them started in the US. Harvard was sort of the grandfather or the father of them all. You have insights into Stanford, Harvard, Chicago's new initiative. They tend to be quite long, residential, a full year. How is the St. Gallen program structured and how's it different?
Yeah, you mentioned a good point. I think the US did a good job in starting off these programs. And if you look into them, especially now that you mentioned the LI and Stanford and Chicago, they are quite, quite established and long. They're like 1 year programs in a way, with their very professional programs, which is great. I think Harvard is a bit different to Stanford at Harvard, and you know this much better than I do. But I think it's a bit more straightforward, as in that you pick a project that's about society and impact, and that's something you're working on. While Stanford, for example, is much more open. Yes, you can pick a project, but you can also do something else. So I like both, to be honest.
Yep.
Depends maybe also on the personality. Even though I also like the fact that you have to ask yourself, or you have to really reflect about what is it that I really want now in terms of the daily practices, maybe the side hustles, or maybe the bigger project in that sense.
Even choosing a program going forward is going to say a lot about you, right? You have to have a certain degree of self-understanding even now to be able to navigate the current options. But
absolutely.
How does St. Gallen fit in? What piece of this puzzle is it filling? Well, one, it's in Europe, which is a useful fill.
Absolutely. It's in Europe, and we have actually asked the alumni of our executive school at a certain age range also what they would be interested in. Asking them whether they would appreciate a few days or like a week, having a month or 3, or having a year. And it was quite clear from the answers that they would appreciate a smaller program. because they said it fits much better into our everyday lives in a way.
A shorter program,
A shorter program.
Yeah, less commitment.
And you asked earlier how much it evolved over time.
Yep.
So we basically started off with 3 days on campus, and we're using the approach that I've been using already for the youngsters and the MBAs, but of course adapted to the people with more life experience, called Design Your Future.
Yep.
And we designed the 3 days to say, day one is, what are you all about? What drives you? Let's make sense of the past and appreciate the present to design the future. Number 2 is about, how does your portfolio of activities look like? Because your life is consisting more of just your career, or how to transition your career, but what are other aspects like your hobbies, your side hustles and other activities? And number 3, which turned out in the end, I'm going to give this away already, the most important is, what if you're stuck? Because life is busy, and what if you procrastinate, which we also call the signs of action, and to overcome it. So we started off with 3 days in person. And in the meantime, people also call it their 3-day sabbatical, which was really nice. But they also said there was more appetite to connect before and also follow up afterwards. So we now have developed this into a 5-day thing. So that's what it is. And we have a bit of a mini evening getting to know each other virtually. That is quite popular but I'm also asking people in the beginning, in which ways are you weird, for example? Because what's important, especially for accomplished executives or people that have lots of life and work experience, is to create the psychological safe ground to show who you really are. Because otherwise you continue the same thing before, and your C-level role becomes the board membership and founding a philanthropy. And for some, that's cool. But most people want to really reconnect to who they are as a person. And that's actually a very rare thing. So creating a psychological safe space is something that's at the very core. And now we have the warm-up, we have the 3 days in person, and they were interested in 2 things. One was health and well-being, which we now provide as a half-day virtual follow-up.
Yep.
And the other one is the signs of action, or how to keep going once the program is over, because the reality of life kicks in. And that really is a challenge. And I know also from other programs, I know from Harvard alumni, I also know it from Stanford very well because I worked there as a visiting faculty, that this whole idea of, once the program is over, how do I sustain certain things or keep going is, I think, the biggest challenge in all programs. And this is also something I'm interested from a research perspective as well. What are the dimensions and features of a community of practice to keep going in that sense? So St. Gallen is smaller. It's more affordable, I would say, probably. So it's around 7,000 euros or francs, which is $8,000. And it also allowed us, because of the shortness of the program, to practice what we preach, which means we prototype stuff and then we iterate, and we can make the iterations quite quickly. Yeah. So we don't have to wait for a year or a year and a half to make changes. I'm not judging other programs, but I think that's definitely an advantage. And this is how we have extended it from 3 days to 5 days. Now we are also bringing in much more alumni. So alumni is always invited to come to the next one, and there's a connection evening. Alumni have even come back, so they take it again, even though to some degree it's similar, but to some degree it's different. And in this way, it has really become now a 75 people vivid community. I know that the groups also meet themselves, because we build 3 to 5 people cohorts of keep going in that sense. But we really want to also extend this even more. And now we're looking into another 3 to 5 days, a mountain retreat to get away from real life, or like from the reality, maybe something even at Lake Como, close to Switzerland. So we really want to extend it to have these kind of building blocks throughout the year. Yep. But to be honest, when we ask some of the people why they wouldn't want a 3-month program, for example, they basically were, in a way, maybe based on earlier experiences, saying, yeah, I know this is great, and I will have 3 months of great time, but the time afterwards will be even harder, because I will not have my people. And then this is something that I think other programs observe as well. Yes, it's great to sell the program and people immerse in it and make great connections. But then the big question is what happens afterwards.
Yeah, I think the harsh reality, and having done the Harvard ALI program or any of these long programs, I think what we all learn is that midlife transitions take more time than we think. I think people often think 3 months or a year, I'll figure it out, I'll get it, and I'll emerge with the answers. And I think everybody kind of wakes up to realize that that's the kind of beginning of the journey. You learn a lot about, you do a lot of what you talk about, digest the past, who I am, what I'm thinking about. And it takes quite a bit of time to be able to open all the doors and windows and start exploring so many possibilities that are now open to us in this new Q3. So I really like in your model and your own personal experience that you're doing all these different life course moments, same kind of thinking, rethinking, getting to know yourself, planning your next chapter in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 50s. And probably, I think you'll eventually come up with something for the 70-year-olds and moving into Q4. That's another topic I think would be really interesting to start exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, when we started to talk about the program, we said there is undergraduate and graduate programs. There's MBA programs. And then we started to say, well, what's the MBA for the 50 plus?
Yeah.
Which shouldn't be an MBA,
yeah.
but just as a label. And you're right. Maybe there will be a 70 plus, 80 plus kind of program.
Next, we'll let you work on this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but it's interesting now that you're mentioning this, because at the very core of this kind of looking back, what's your portfolio? What if you procrastinate? We really use like a lot of science-based thing. Like we use design thinking as an innovation method. We integrate positive psychology, so strength and well-being. And we also integrate behavioral economics to make better decisions. And at the end of the day, and this is also deeply rooted in research, and I think you've also spoken to Herminia at some point, one of the key skills in being good in transitions is to see yourself less as a victim and be more of a driver in the transition. And having agency from a research perspective, we would say having more agency in that sense. And I really came to think about, from the youngsters, the MBAs, the best ages, and maybe the 70 plus, that this is really about developing a transition competence.
Yes.
And it's all about agency and proactivity. Being able, yes, to do this for big life dreams, like the big media stories we hear, that's beautiful and it happens in a few cases, but also doing it on a small scale. How do I redesign my morning or how my energy unfolds throughout the day? Because everybody has once in a day a prime time for 3 hours where you have your highest physical, mental, emotional capacities. If you know about that, maybe you can design your single days better, design your portfolios. And the other second component I wanted to mention, but then I'm happy to give the word back to you. But I think it's important because it takes time. One, start small, build self-efficacy, have learning loops in order to build the productivity. But then also two, and that's also something I'm interested in my research, but practical work at the same time. What are the practices that people do to stay sane and patient and healthy in the process of uncertainty? Because transition is having said maybe goodbye to something, not knowing what is going to come next.
Transition's hard. It's scary. It's lonely. It can be super turbulent. People vastly underestimate the kind of emotional kickback that some of these transitions can take. So yes, absolutely. It's getting more comfortable with that side of things is a huge, and even just knowing you're not alone in experiencing those feelings, I find one of the great benefits of finding a community of change like this.
Absolutely. And you're hitting it on the spot. It's like maybe being comfortable and being, I always like to say being temporarily uncomfortable in that sense. And also when I work with Next fellows in Switzerland and also DCI fellows at Stanford, where I do a lot of office hours and individual coachings, it's a lot also about staying patient, that it takes time.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to observe in general with people at this age, sometimes also because they have been successful in telling people what to do, there is a certain impatience there and then wanting just the next thing. And usually people like they rush to board memberships and philanthropy because it sounds great. And I think it's also good to do this. But if you give a bit more of time, and if you create a community of psychological safety where you can say, I always loved vintage Vespas, or I always loved comics. And anybody who knows you, your family, friends, maybe colleagues might be saying, really? You? Comics? What the heck? But this kind of community of strangers or strangers becoming friends might be like just as simple as, well, tell me more about Vespers. Tell me more about comics.
Yeah.
And you start that very beautiful process of self-discovery, and then small ways to bring it into your future by trying it. And then, you can really see how people's eyes, how they talk about doing whatever is important to them in that sense.
So you're touching really on the whole science of action and creativity in midlife, and you have some wonderful expressions. So I want you to dig into how do people overcome this thing you call infinite procrastination? What is that, and how I can easily believe a lot of people get stuck right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many choices on offer. How do you get through it?
Yeah, there is definite procrastination of things that have a deadline, which we all know, right? And it's heavily debated. So in 7 days, you have to do something, you don't do anything. And then the night before, just like my students, 24 hours, you do everything. That's it. And that's heavily debated. There's famous TED Talks about it. That's beautiful. However, the other thing that is not so much known, actually even not discussed at all, is the infinite procrastination about things that don't have a deadline. Or you could argue, what's the ultimate deadline? Is it death, maybe? Or maybe you're reborn. I don't know. Maybe you can do it next life. I know one guy he's a designer. He put the skull in his shelf to remind him of the ultimate deadline in that sense. But that's an absolute interesting one. And especially with the generation of the 50 plus best agers, that pops up all the time.
Yeah.
So they're always asking themselves, what's next? Was that it? Or is there something else coming? And then reconnecting, I always wanted to do this and that. I always wanted to open a restaurant, etc., etc. So what we're going to do with them in the science of action. Well, maybe one thing is that actually to say procrastination is real. It's normal. In fact, when you look into science, 98% of people procrastinate.
Yeah.
So welcome to the club. As you said, if you know that other people are doing it, it also makes you feel more relaxed. So one, be in peace with the fact that you do it. Two, let's find out a little bit more why you do it. Is it maybe your inner voices based on external beliefs, even still from your parents? Even if you're 60 years old, you still have the voices from your parents. Or is it, as you said, maybe overwhelmed? So maybe having too many options. One of the many methods we do, and I think one of the most popular methods that we have done is called the magic circle. And then we should do it as well at some point. It's absolutely beautiful. It's very simple, but I developed it because it didn't exist. And it's basically, the first circle is about an idea you always wanted to do. So let's say I had a person, she said, I always wanted to, funniest thing, actually, she wanted to open a restaurant in London. She was from Switzerland, but she wanted to open a restaurant in London. And then we said, okay, the second circle it's all about empathy or self-empathy, as in what is behind it. What does it matter to you? Why does it matter to you? And especially, one, write it down for yourself, but then also engage with others and really be the person who's not negative or critical at this stage, but the person who is appreciative, curious, and empathetic. And again, the three magic words, tell me more.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this changes all the conversations for MBAs, for the 18s, for the best ages in that sense. So that's the second circle, what's behind it. And you open up and so on. And then the third circle is about how might you prototype this now? How can you create a small experience with low risk in terms of time, money, and emotion? So you don't have to have 3 months off. You don't have to pay $10,000 or whatever. What can you do now in order to verify this assumption that you have about it? If it's really cool. And to come back to the example from the London restaurant, she ended up turning her living room in a restaurant for one afternoon on a Sunday. She invited 3 friends, and each of her friends could bring 2 strangers, also like friends of them, but that she didn't know. So there was a bit of a atmosphere of not just friends. And she cooked some food that she could easily do because it was more about getting into it. And then when she was done, we always ask as a life designer, we would never ask, was it good or bad? Because that's the fixed mindset. So we always ask, applying the growth mindset, what did you learn?
Yeah.
It's all about learning. And she said, well, I learned that I don't need a restaurant and I also don't need to do it in London. But the big learning was, she said, I really like to be a host and I like to create atmospheres. And I would always connect this with having my own space and all the nitty-gritty details. But now, because I know that behind this is being a host, it's very liberating because I can play this out now in many ways. And maybe eventually it might lead to that restaurant, but I can do it in small steps. And I usually, based on the magic circle, I usually let people, that's my second thing that we do together, I let them do the so-called stairway to heaven, where they can have this kind of idea of the restaurant and then kind of map what are the prototypes on the way there. And it eventually leads you there, but eventually leads you also to other places in a way.
Love it. Stairway to heaven. What a wonderful magic circles and heavens. I think you're using wonderful vocabulary for the ride. So I want you now to turn a little bit to bridging the personal and the organizational change. Yeah. You're talking to a lot of leaders. You're working with a lot of executives and companies on kind of their longevity strategies. You've talked to us about the individual pillar. How does this link the personal midlife transitions to maybe broader strategies around aging workforces? Do you do that? Are they talking about it? Does it filter through?
Yeah, that's an interesting and big one. Let me try to focus on a few aspects here. So I think what's interesting, we have had a session at the UN Goals House at the World Economic Forum.
Yep.
And with Maura Forbes. And we discussed the new reality and that there are more transitions. And the biggest question was, are the organizations responsible for these career transitions or is it the individual? And what's interesting is that careers are changing, as you know very, very well. And you're, I think, a great ambassador for bringing this to the world. So we might still have one career, as we have heard in another podcast of yours, where one person was working for Wall Street Journal, I think, or New York Times for 40 years. But we are having the multi-stage careers. We still might have people on the linear career, but we have more non-linear careers. Maybe a portfolio career, maybe a late boomer, maybe returnships and other things. So there is a new reality. And the question now is, what are organizations doing with this?
Yeah.
And to be honest, when I'm working with organizations, oftentimes at the beginning, it's about the individual. So we help the individual to help them build this transition competence, making them fit who they are, how to bring it in the future, what if they are stuck. So that's absolutely a big component. And it helps them immediately for themselves. So it's almost like a mini next program within the organization.
Yeah.
And they also bring it to their teams, which we are doing at different organizations, like different banks in Zurich, for example, or even the International Olympic Committee. I had a program of the Swiss Stock Exchange for 12 months, actually, where we had different nuggets to do this for the individuals. And then when it comes to the organizational side of things, that's, let's say, less immediate in a way, because for the individual, it's very immediate. I can tell you something right now and you can apply it tomorrow. And organizations, as we both know, take some more time. So the question is, what are we doing with organizations? Are we building new career adaptability, career development programs? So it becomes more of a program initiative thing within organizations, where we have started now to work with a bank. They offered a so-called life design seminars for people 50 plus. So there are these bigger programs in a way. And yeah, I mean, organizations do it because they want to offer it, but also because they have pain. So the pain of, for example, not having enough employees. So the agenda behind setting up such a program is also to make people happy, but also have them hopefully work a little bit longer for the organization.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing. The other one is working straightforward on policies. So I had another bank, actually a bank in the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. And they said we need to get away from this idea of retirement, of moving from 100 to 0.
Yeah.
And I think it's still, if I think about it, and you know this very well, it's just insane and so not human to do this.
Yes, I know.
But the thing is, humans are by nature lazy, and they like to follow behavioral economic standards that are given to them by society, organizations, by feeds in Instagram. And so when an organization has the default of a retirement plan, you might still have 10% of people that move themselves around it because they have connections, they have a strong willingness to do so, but the majority does it. So that's why another one is to work on policies and to see if there's an alternative that is a bit more complex because it's about compensation and so on. But it's really also about offering more options for people to choose, and then also having both the employee benefit from it and also the organization benefit from it. We even work with companies where people can create their own portfolios within the organization. So they have a 50% job on one thing and 50 on another one. And we start now to work with organizations to have portfolios beyond the organization. So at Swiss Re, for example, they may reduce to 80% at Swiss Re, but they work 20% for a social startup, for example. And that makes them also stick to the organization. They can get skills outside of the organization and bring it back to the workplace. So in this way, there are some initiatives you can do with organizations. But then, of course, it's too few that are happening.
Yeah.
And this is also why...
It's the beginning. It's starting.
Yeah, it's the beginning. So yeah, I'm appreciating everybody who does something.
Yeah.
And together with the World Demographic Forum, we're writing a report now on transition programs where we portray all the university initiatives that we talked about earlier, but also everything organizations do and also even governments do. The City of New York has an interesting program now to even bring back people from retirement back into administration. But also organizations offer now even small things like, for example, there's an insurance company offering 2 half-day shadowings per year, where you can shadow somebody else in the organization to anticipate how it would be like to work in this department before you start a big process. Also because they had too many mishires, for example. Or the UN is doing in Geneva a 3-day immersion program where you can anticipate and prototype how it would be to work for the UN. But it's also because they had a lot of mishires. So people thinking they can change the world with working with the UN. Yeah. And then when they talk to somebody who says, I've been here for 30 years and I changed 2 policies. Yeah. And working for the UN is a lot of reading, is a lot of just discussing, and is a lot of patience. The right people, it attracts even more, and the not so fitting people.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, there's a whole range of kind of innovations and attempts and new ideas. So it's very interesting to track them and interesting to see which organizations will be the first movers in this space. We're certainly always interested in who they might be. I want to turn back maybe just to universities and education's role, because I think it's so huge. And as we opened this program, we said that a lot of this midlife thing has started in the US, where I think people are much more open to change, and the Anglo-Saxon world generally is, I think, a little bit more flexible in some ways, or certainly that's the perception we have. Now we have a couple of programs in Europe. What would you say, if you can, what's the contrast in approach, in the makeup of the people who come? I assume the majority of your participants are European, which is not the case, obviously, in these other programs. How does that impact? What does it change, if anything? Or what's a difference in approach?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a big difference and a small difference at the same time.
Yep.
I think it's also good to learn from both worlds, let's say, maybe the Anglo-Saxon and the European perspective. You're right. If you were in the Anglo-Saxon world, when I'm at Stanford, people are very open and very eager to do things. And I can just throw in a method and we are excited to do it. I think that's also important, and it's a very good atmosphere. My very first differentiation to Europe and Switzerland and European participants in Switzerland, because people come from different countries, is they want some more rigorous academic science basis for what we're doing. So why are we doing this? Why is this relevant? This is so much more, almost at the front, to give them some more academic rigorousness and relevance to them. And I like it. And it also pushed me many years ago, even for the youngsters and the MBAs, to base all the things I do in different academic disciplines. And I think that's a big difference. So it takes maybe a little bit longer to open people up. But at the same time, as I said earlier, if you can create an atmosphere of psychological safety, people are willing to share in that sense. There is a different richness in the room, I would say, in terms of different perspectives, because Europe offers, in such a proximity, different landscapes, food, languages, and maybe complicatedness, but also richness of cultures, which steers different conversations, I would say. It also is, for me as a professor for creativity, nice because it kind of like embodies this multi-perspective thinking. And I think it's very rich. And I feel sometimes, but I don't want to get too political here, I feel like sometimes in a small scale, we're having these conversations that we should also have on a bigger scale, especially if we speak about continental Europe or Europe in general. It's time to shape a different identity or shape an identity at all. And I think business leaders who may also have a certain leverage factor are a good cohort to work with. Yeah. But always, and this is really something that I learned from working around the world, and especially in Europe, is starting with the person themselves. So starting to shape their proactivity in their own personal life, very personal lives, then eventually have the self-efficacy, the proactivity to take it to friends, cohorts, maybe teams, and then eventually maybe even to their organizations and society in that sense. Yeah. So it seems a bit more complicated in the beginning, but I think it has a lot of potential to benefit from it. And I would also say that life in Europe is a little bit different to what I can hear from my colleagues in the US, that there is less of an intergenerational separation when it comes to families, for example. I know colleagues at Stanford where it's clear at a birthday party, you have the kids table and the adults table, and that's fine. While in Europe, I would say it's more integrated, and maybe that makes intergenerational exchange also maybe more easy. In a way, it's still difficult, yeah, but maybe it comes more handy. And I'm now also working with a mentoring program at my university, and we're looking into integrating this more into the next program. And I can also sense a strong appetite for people to having that intergenerational exchange. But yeah, the academic rigorousness, taking an effort to warm up people, I would say, and also orchestrating the exchanges around psychological safety and the benefits of having different perspectives is very beneficial. And sometimes I would like to just take a little bit of the easiness from Stanford also to Europe. So in this way, I think we can also learn from each other in that sense. While if I would present too many slides of academic rigorousness, maybe in certain places they will be bored easily. So maybe people want some more immediate action in that sense. But I think this is, a European particularity that I think has a lot of benefits. And I wish, and maybe that's something even for us to talk about, that's definitely something on our agenda is to ignite more programs. Because St. Gallen is the first and, to be honest, the only one in continental Europe at the moment. Yeah. You have now, I think, Oxford came a year later. Yeah. And now you have Cambridge that is starting this fall, I think, for the first time. Yeah. But also with a year-long program. So having a bit more of maybe the European spirit could also be having a bit more of a small, agile, flexible kind of agenda. And if that includes spending a few days in Switzerland or Italy or Spain or Portugal, I think, even for myself personally, I think this will be the best and very enriching experience.
Sebastian Kernbach, I want to thank you for sharing with us your magic circles, stairways to heaven, and general openness to a whole life mapping of life by design that you've been developing. And thank you for initiating the first such program in continental Europe. I think that's worth repeating. And like you, I hope that we will be able to ignite lots more interest between the longevity leadership program I co-direct at Católica in Lisbon, yours in St. Gallen, and now the one starting up in the UK. Sounds to me like we might have a little bit of a thing going on in Europe. So let's see if we can blow it up. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and I hope our paths will cross again very soon.
Thank you, Avivah. Thanks for having me.
Great pleasure. For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.